Billionaire orders steak. Black waitress hands him a handkerchief. He falls silent. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The restaurant was one of the finest in the city, nestled between towering skyscrapers, its golden sign reflecting the glow of the setting sun. Inside, the atmosphere was as polished as the marble floors, every corner exuding luxury. The gentle hum of conversation blended with the clinking of silverware, the soft melodies of a piano playing in the background. At one of the tables, a billionaire sat, his posture immaculate as he examined the menu. His name was Thomas Lawson, a man known for his ruthlessness in the boardroom. But here, in this moment, he was just a man, contemplating his meal. He finally made his choice, steak, cooked medium rare. As he placed his order with the waitress, he didn't notice her at first. She stood at the edge of his table, not looking at him directly, but he could feel her presence. She was different. Her name was Maya, a waitress with quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the opulence surrounding her. She handed him the menu and, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, turned to leave. But then, something changed. Maya paused, turned back around, and reached into the pocket of her uniform. She pulled out a simple white handkerchief and placed it gently on his table, right beside his glass of water. For a moment, Thomas stared at it, then up at her. Maya's eyes met his. There was no fear, no hesitation, just an unspoken understanding. The room around them seemed to quiet as the billionaire's usual confidence faltered. A silence fell between them, thick and unyielding. His grip tightened around the knife in front of him, and for the first time, the familiar clatter of the restaurant faded into the background. The handkerchief, so ordinary, felt out of place in this polished world of wealth and power. It was as though it held a secret, a message meant only for him. The air felt charged, and the rhythm of his heartbeat quickened. Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The handkerchief, seemingly so insignificant, had somehow pierced the walls he had built around himself. He was no longer the untouchable billionaire. He was simply a man, caught off guard by something as simple as a piece of cloth. Maya, with her quiet dignity, stood there, waiting, offering nothing more than a silent gesture. In that moment, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years: vulnerability. The steak, now a forgotten choice on the menu, no longer mattered. As the seconds stretched on, Maya turned to leave, her presence still lingering in the space between them. Her step was light, purposeful. But for Thomas, the world had shifted, even if only for a moment. The question remained: what was it about this woman that had such an effect on him? The soft hum of the restaurant slowly crept back into Thomas's consciousness. The voices, the clinking of glasses, the quiet murmur of the piano, all of it seemed distant now, like a dream fading as he woke up. The handkerchief remained on the table, a stark contrast to the sleek surroundings of marble and gold. He stared at it, his fingers hovering just above it, yet unwilling to touch it. Why had she given it to him? Maya, the waitress, had been quick to walk away after placing it there, as though it were nothing more than an everyday gesture. But to him, it felt like a sign, a message he wasn't ready to decode. His mind raced, the questions swirling around him like the smoke from a cigar. He had always been in control, always. He had built his empire from nothing, fought tooth and nail for every success. And now here he was, confused by a simple piece of cloth. The weight of his thoughts was heavy, and the restaurant around him felt suddenly suffocating. It had been a long time since anyone had left him speechless, and certainly no one had done it with something as ordinary as a handkerchief. He pushed the thought aside. It was just a handkerchief. No need to dwell on it. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. It was something personal. As he picked up the glass of water in front of him, his eyes lingered on the handkerchief again. What was he even doing here, in this grand restaurant, surrounded by people who only cared about his wealth? It was always the same. Business deals, meetings, appearances. Yet in that moment, with the handkerchief staring back at him, something shifted. For the first time, he questioned the life he had built. As he thought about the woman who had handed him the cloth, Maya, he remembered her eyes, steady, unflinching, as though she knew something he didn't. A quiet strength radiated from her. But it wasn't just that. There was something about her, something that set her apart from the usual servers he interacted with. She wasn't fawning over him, trying to please him like the others. She simply did her job, and that was it. And yet, in that simple act, she had made him feel vulnerable. A strange, foreign feeling for someone like him. But why? Was it because of her unspoken confidence? Or was it because she reminded him of something he had lost touch with, humility? The thought startled him. What had he become? He had spent so many years amassing wealth and power, but in that moment, all of it seemed meaningless. Maya's silent gesture had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Just then, the sound of footsteps brought him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Maya returning, this time with his steak. She placed the plate in front of him, her hands steady, and met his gaze for a brief moment. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, her voice soft, almost too gentle for the setting. Thomas blinked, a little caught off guard. "Yes, everything is fine," he replied, the words slipping out before he could think. But his mind wasn't on the steak or the fine wine anymore. It was on Maya and the unspoken connection that had been made in the brief exchange earlier. He couldn't explain it, but it was there. Something real, something raw. For a moment, she stood there, waiting for his approval, but he only nodded, distracted. He wanted to say something, to ask her why she had given him the handkerchief, to ask her what it meant, but the words were stuck. Maya turned to leave, but as she did, she hesitated for just a second. A fleeting moment. He watched her walk. Away, her steps light, almost as if she were floating. The brief hesitation had left him with even more questions, but he couldn't bring himself to ask them now. The room seemed to close in around him as he looked back down at the steak, but his appetite had all but vanished. He couldn't help but wonder who she really was. And as the evening wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night, this encounter, would change everything. It had only been a handkerchief, but it had made him question everything he thought he knew. The night continued on around him, but Thomas was no longer part of it. The weight of his thoughts had shifted, and he could feel the pulse of something unspoken lingering in the air. Maya's simple gesture, the handkerchief, was still at the forefront of his mind. He had tried to focus on his meal, but the steak, even prepared to perfection, tasted bland. Each bite was mechanical, just a part of the routine. What was it about Maya? Why had she handed him that cloth? She didn't ask for anything in return. She simply offered it. He felt it in his chest, a tightness he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just the handkerchief, it was the way she moved, the way she carried herself. She had this quiet dignity that no one else in the room seemed to possess. As he finished his meal, Thomas made a decision. He wasn't sure why, but he needed to understand more about her. He couldn't leave the restaurant without knowing why she had done what she did. With his mind set on this newfound curiosity, Thomas stood up and made his way to the front of the restaurant. His footsteps echoed on the polished floor as he walked toward the exit. His eyes scanned the room, and he spotted Maya. She was standing by the service area, organizing the silverware with the same calm precision that had caught his attention earlier. He paused, watching her for a moment. Something about her demeanor made him hesitate. She wasn't the kind of woman who asked for anything. She didn't beg for attention. She simply did her job, with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly in the midst of such wealth. Thomas approached her, his heart beating faster than it should have. She looked up at him as he neared, her expression neutral, but there was a flicker in her eyes, as though she had been expecting him. "Maya," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I wanted to thank you for earlier." She nodded, but didn't say anything. He could see that she wasn't surprised by his approach. It was as if she had anticipated it, but she remained composed. "I don't quite understand," he continued, his curiosity overtaking him. "Why did you give me that handkerchief?" Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Thomas felt exposed. It was as if she could see right through him, all the way to the part of him that had been hardened by years of power and control. "It was just a handkerchief," she replied softly, almost as if she was trying to reassure him. "But why?" he pressed. "Why did you give it to me, of all people?" Maya paused, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the counter, as if searching for the right words. "Because I thought you needed it," she said quietly. "And because I know what it feels like to be lost." To be in a place where you don't know who you are anymore. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't sure why, but there was a truth in them that felt real. He had spent so many years building this empire, this perfect facade, but now, standing in front of Maya, it all felt so empty. And you think that's what I am? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lost. She nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on his. We all get lost sometimes, she said. But it doesn't mean we can't find our way back. Thomas felt his chest tighten. There was a weight in her words, something he hadn't considered before. His life had been built on wealth, success, and control, but here, standing in front of Maya, he felt like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't explain. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice raw. Maya offered him a small smile, the kind that didn't demand anything in return. You don't have to say anything, she replied. Sometimes, it's enough just to listen. There was a moment of silence between them, the kind that felt like it lasted a lifetime. Maya didn't say anything more, and Thomas didn't know if he could. There was something deeply personal in what she had said, something that cut through all the layers he had built around himself. And in that moment, he realized that Maya, in her quiet, unassuming way, had just offered him something he had never truly known: vulnerability. He took a step back, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. Thank you, he said, his voice a little firmer now. I'll think about what you said. Maya nodded, her smile widening just a fraction. I hope you do, she said softly. With that, she turned back to her work, leaving Thomas standing there, in the middle of the restaurant, still caught between the man he had been and the man he was beginning to understand he could become. As he walked out of the restaurant, the cool night air hit his face, but it didn't feel cold. It felt like a new beginning, something he wasn't sure he was ready for, but something he knew he needed to face. The handkerchief, that simple piece of cloth, had started something in him, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. The following days were a blur for Thomas. He found himself unable to focus on his meetings or the endless calls demanding his attention. Maya's words had haunted him, echoing in his mind like a soft whisper that refused to fade. He had always prided himself on being in control, on being the one who made the decisions, who dictated the flow of his empire. But now, it seemed like something had shifted inside him. Something he hadn't expected, and certainly hadn't wanted. The handkerchief, that simple act of kindness, had left a mark on him. He couldn't explain why, but he felt like he needed to understand more about Maya. She wasn't just a waitress. There was something deeper about her, something that reached beyond the surface. One afternoon, after another long day of meetings, Thomas found himself walking through the streets of the city, his footsteps heavy with the weight of his thoughts. The world around him seemed to move and fast forward, while he stood still, caught in a moment of uncertainty. His eyes wandered, and he found himself approaching the restaurant again. He hadn't planned to come back, but something inside him urged him to. It wasn't about the meal or the service, it was about Maya. He entered the restaurant, the familiar chime of the door signaling his arrival. The staff greeted him politely, but his eyes immediately searched for her. It didn't take long to spot her, standing near the back, preparing a tray of drinks. She looked up as he approached, her expression neutral, but her eyes seemed to soften when they met his. Thomas, she said, her voice still as calm as it had been the first time they spoke. You're back. He nodded, unsure of what to say. I wanted to talk to you, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. Maya didn't speak right away, but gestured toward an empty table. Have a seat. I'll be right with you. As he sat down, he watched her move through the restaurant with quiet precision. There was something graceful about the way she carried herself, as if she were completely at ease in her own skin, unaffected by the wealth and opulence that surrounded her. When she returned, she placed a glass of water in front of him, her hands steady and sure. What's on your mind? She asked, her eyes meeting his once again. He paused, taking a breath. I've been thinking about what you said, about being lost. Maya's gaze didn't waver. And what did you realize? She asked, her tone still soft, but with a hint of curiosity. I realized that I don't know who I am anymore, he admitted, his words coming out before he could stop them. I've spent so many years building my business, my life, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Maya's eyes softened. It happens, she said simply. But that doesn't mean it's too late to find yourself again. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the table. "How do you do it?" he asked, genuinely curious. "How do you stay so grounded, so real, in a world that's constantly changing and pulling you in different directions?" Maya smiled faintly, but there was a quiet wisdom in her eyes. "It's not about the world around you," she said. "It's about what you carry inside. The world will try to change you, to make you forget who you are, but as long as you hold on to that inner truth, you'll always find your way back." Thomas sat quietly for a moment, letting her words sink in. There was something about her, something that felt genuine and pure, in contrast to the world he had built. For the first time in years, he felt like he was talking to someone who didn't want anything from him, someone who saw him for who he really was. Not just the billionaire, not just the man with power and influence. "I don't know if I can find my way back," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've made so many mistakes, hurt so many people." Maya's expression softened. "We all have our regrets. But that doesn't mean we can't change. It's never too late." Her words were simple, yet they resonated deep within him. He realized then that it wasn't about fixing everything all at once. It was about taking small steps, being honest with himself, and, for the first time, allowing himself to be vulnerable. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I'm willing to try." Maya nodded, her smile faint but warm. "That's all anyone can do." The conversation lingered between them for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people, sitting together, sharing a moment of understanding. As Thomas left the restaurant that evening, the weight on his chest seemed a little lighter. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know where this journey would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The simple act of kindness from a waitress had opened his eyes to something he had been blind to for years, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. The days following their conversation were strange for Thomas. He found himself unable to focus on the things that used to bring him satisfaction. The power lunches, the high-stakes meetings, the endless contracts, all of it seemed distant now, as if it had lost its shine. The thoughts of Maya, her calm confidence, and the simple wisdom she had shared with him were constantly at the forefront of his mind. He had always prided himself on controlling everything around him, his empire, his wealth, his world. But for the first time, he felt uncertain. It wasn't just Maya's words. It was the feeling that had grown in him, the feeling of wanting to change, to do something different. But what did that mean for him? Could he really walk away from the life he had built, or was he destined to remain in this gilded cage forever? One evening, unable to shake the unease that had settled deep inside him, Thomas found himself standing outside the restaurant once more. He wasn't sure what he was doing here. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was something else, a desire to make a connection, to find some kind of clarity in the midst of all this confusion. As he stepped inside, the familiar warmth of the restaurant enveloped him, but it felt different this time. The golden light seemed dimmer, the clinking of glasses less melodic. He spotted Maya almost immediately, standing by the bar, chatting with a few of the staff. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he was even going to say to her, but then he walked toward her. She looked up as he approached, and this time, her expression wasn't neutral. It wasn't guarded or indifferent. There was something softer there, something that invited him in. "Thomas," she said, her voice still as calm as ever. "What brings you back?" "I don't really know," he admitted, his voice low. I guess I wanted to talk to you again." Maya smiled faintly, and for the first time, he felt like she wasn't just doing her job. She was genuinely listening, genuinely present. "About what?" she asked, her eyes meeting his. "About what you said the other day," he replied, taking a deep breath. "About being lost." She didn't respond right away, but simply nodded, as if waiting for him to continue. "I've been thinking about it a lot," he said, his words coming more easily now. "I've spent my whole life building something. I've worked so hard to get where I am, but I don't know if any of it means anything anymore." Maya's eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. She simply listened. "I've been so focused on control, on power. But I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if I even want it anymore." He stopped, realizing how vulnerable he had just become. It wasn't easy to admit, but it felt like he couldn't hold it back any longer. Maya looked at him for a long moment, and then, without saying a word, she stepped closer. "It's okay," she said quietly, her voice gentle. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to feel lost. That's the first step toward finding yourself. The simplicity of her words, the sincerity in her voice, made something inside him stir. He had spent so long building walls around himself, thinking that he needed to have everything figured out, that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. He had forgotten how to just be. I don't know what comes next, he said, his voice shaking slightly. But I know I need to change. I can't keep living like this. Maya nodded. Change doesn't happen overnight, she said. But it starts with small steps. You don't have to do it all at once. She paused, her eyes soft but steady. You've already taken the first step by acknowledging it. Thomas swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. He didn't have to have it all figured out right away. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't sure what that path looked like yet, but he knew that Maya had helped him see something he couldn't see before. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, he said, his voice quiet. But I want to try. I want to be better. Maya's smile widened just a little. That's all anyone can do, she said. Just keep trying. The sincerity in her words, the calm assurance, made Thomas feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lost as he thought. He wasn't sure what was next, but he knew that he wanted to find out. As he left the restaurant that evening, something inside him had shifted. The weight that had been pressing on his chest felt a little lighter. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to walk down it. The handkerchief, that simple piece of cloth, had started him on this journey, and he wasn't sure where it would take him. But for the first time, he was okay with that. The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of anticipation for Thomas. The weight in his chest had not disappeared completely, but it had lessened. Every morning, he woke with a new sense of clarity, a fresh resolve that he couldn't fully explain. He found himself thinking about Maya more than he ever expected. Her words lingered in his mind like an echo, growing louder each day. Small steps, she had said. He didn't have to have it all figured out. But each step forward felt like progress, even if it was only incremental. He started doing things differently. He stopped rushing through his meetings. He paid more attention to the people around him, noticing details he had previously overlooked. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One afternoon, while he was walking through the city, he happened to pass by the restaurant where he had met Maya. He hadn't planned to go in, but something about the place called to him. He found himself at the door before he could even think about it. The bell chimed softly as he stepped inside. The atmosphere was the same as he remembered, luxurious, yet somehow distant. Maya wasn't at the bar this time. He looked around, searching for her, and his eyes found her near the back of the room. She was carrying a tray of drinks, her movements graceful and efficient. She caught his eye for just a moment, and for the briefest second, he saw a flicker of recognition in her expression. He walked toward her, unsure of what to say. When he reached her, she didn't say anything at first, just placed the tray down on the counter. Thomas, she said, her voice steady but warm. Back again. He nodded, feeling a little uncertain. I guess I keep finding myself here, he replied, his voice low. I wanted to see you again. Maya raised an eyebrow, but there was no judgment in her gaze. What's on your mind? She asked. Thomas hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. I've been thinking about our conversation, he said finally. About finding myself. About the fact that I've been so focused on control and power that I've forgotten what it's like to just be. Maya listened quietly, her expression softening. It's not easy, she said after a moment. But you're doing it. You're acknowledging it, and that's the first step. Thomas was silent for a while, absorbing her words. He wasn't sure where he was going with this or what he was expecting from her. But somehow, just talking to her, having her listen without judgment, felt like a step toward something important. I don't know how to change, he admitted. I don't know what to do next. I've spent so much of my life chasing after things, money, success, power, but none of that feels as important anymore. I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads, and I don't know which way to go. Maya's gaze was steady as she looked at him. You don't have to have all the answers right now, she said. You just have to keep walking. The path will reveal itself when you're ready. Her voice was calm, but there was a strength in it that resonated with him. It was the kind of strength he had longed for in his own life, but had never quite been able to find. I'm not used to feeling so uncertain, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. I've always been the one who knows exactly what I want and how to get it. Maya nodded. I understand. But maybe it's time to let go of that need for control. Sometimes, the best things in life come when you least expect them. Her words were simple, but they hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't about controlling everything, about having the answers right away. It was about allowing himself to be open to what life had to offer. Maybe that was the change he needed to make. I guess I've been so focused on the destination that I forgot to enjoy the journey, he said, almost to himself. Maya smiled, a soft, understanding smile. Exactly, she said. The journey is where life happens. The destination is just the end of it. Thomas found himself nodding slowly. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was starting to see things clearly. The road ahead was still uncertain, but at least now he knew he didn't have to have it all figured out. He didn't have to control everything. It was enough to just take the next step, however small it might be. Thank you, he said quietly. Maya tilted her head slightly. For what? For helping me see that, he replied. She gave him a small, knowing smile. It's not me. It's you, Thomas. You're the one making the changes. Thomas felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. As he left the restaurant that evening, he felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't the end of his journey, but it was the beginning of something new. He didn't know exactly where he was headed, but he knew he was headed in the right direction. Thomas couldn't shake the sense that things were changing, and as the days passed, the weight that had once felt so heavy seemed lighter. He began to understand that change wasn't a sudden moment. It was a slow process, a series of small steps. The shift in his mindset, the shift in his life, was something he had to embrace fully. He started asking himself questions he had never considered before. Was the empire he had built really the life he wanted? Or was he living according to expectations that had been placed on him long ago? Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, but for the first time, he didn't feel lost. He felt like he was on the right track. His visits to the restaurant continued, though now, they weren't driven by the need for an answer. They were driven by something else, a desire to understand Maya better. She was a constant source of quiet wisdom, her steady presence and simplicity something he found himself needing. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city, Thomas arrived at the restaurant again. He had been coming regularly, not just for the meals, but for the conversations he now looked forward to. As he stepped through the door, he spotted Maya, as usual, carrying a tray of drinks. Their eyes met, and a smile flickered on her face before she quickly turned back to her task. It was the kind of smile that said everything without saying a word. Maya had never been the kind to openly display emotion, but there was something in her demeanor that had shifted. It wasn't just that she was polite. It was that she now felt like someone who saw him for who he truly was. She didn't treat him like a billionaire or a customer. She treated him like a person. That was a feeling he had long forgotten. As she returned to him, Thomas found himself strangely nervous, unsure of what to say. Hey Maya, he said, his voice a little quieter than usual. How are you? She looked at him, her expression softening slightly. I'm good. How about you? She replied, her voice calm but with a hint of curiosity. He hesitated, unsure how to phrase his thoughts. I've been thinking about what you said. About small steps. About finding myself again. Maya tilted her head, waiting for him to continue. I think I've been running away from the truth for so long, he continued, the words coming easier now. I've built this life, this empire, but I don't think I ever stopped to ask myself if it was the life I really wanted. She nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes it takes a while to realize that, she said gently. The world keeps pushing us in one direction, but we don't always know where we're going. Thomas felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if she understood exactly what he was going through without needing an explanation. It's like I've been living on autopilot, he confessed. But I want to change that. I want to figure out what really matters. Maya smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his. You're already on the right path, she said softly. Just by admitting it, by being open to it, you're already doing the hard part. For a moment, Thomas was silent, reflecting on her words. There was something about her that grounded him, something he had never expected. She wasn't telling him what to do, she wasn't offering solutions. She was just there, listening, and letting him find his own way. He realized that was all he had needed. I'm scared though, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that if I let go of everything I've built, I'll be left with nothing. Maya's expression softened, and she reached for a nearby napkin, her hands steady. You're not alone in this, she said. There are people who care about you, people who see you for who you really are, not just the things you've built. Her words struck him deeply. For the first time in a long time, he realized that Maya wasn't just offering advice. She was offering him something much more profound, compassion. Maybe that's what I've been missing, he said slowly. Maybe I've been so focused on the external, on my success, my wealth, that I forgot what really matters. The people in my life, the connections. Maya smiled, her eyes warm. It's never too late to make those connections, to rediscover what really matters. It's all part of the process. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling something inside him shift. He had spent so much of his life living according to his own expectations, but now, he was starting to see the bigger picture. It wasn't about the power, the money, or the prestige. It was about finding meaning in the moments, in the people around him. For the first time, he felt like he could breathe again. He didn't need to have all the answers right now, and he didn't need to control everything. Maya was right. It was the small steps that mattered. He could start over. He could take his time. I'm not sure where this journey will take me, he said, his voice quiet but steady. But I know I want to take it. And I don't want to do it alone. Maya looked at him, her expression thoughtful. You won't be alone, she said softly. You just have to trust that the right people will come into your life at the right time. Thomas smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he was okay with not knowing. He was ready to walk this new path, one step at a time. The days after their conversation felt like a blur for Thomas. The constant hum of his business, the meetings, the calls, it all began to feel less important. For the first time in a long while, he found himself questioning his priorities. He had always prided himself on being in control, but now, after speaking with Maya, everything seemed different. He had started to recognize that there was more to life than the numbers on a spreadsheet or the power plays in a boardroom. He was beginning to understand that what really mattered was connection. That realization, however, wasn't without its complications. As Thomas continued down this uncertain path, he found himself pulled back to the restaurant again. The place was a sanctuary of sorts now, where he could escape the noise of his world and reflect. He hadn't planned to see Maya that evening, but as he walked in, he felt an inexplicable pull to her. She was standing by the bar, chatting with another staff member, her movements fluid and graceful. When she noticed him walking in, she gave him a nod, a slight smile curling on her lips. He approached, feeling the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Back again? She asked, her voice warm and unassuming, as if nothing had changed. Thomas nodded slowly. I've been thinking a lot about everything, he said, the words coming more easily now. Maya studied him for a moment, as if waiting for him to continue. I'm trying to figure things out. My life, my choices. Maya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. And what have you figured out so far? She asked. Thomas smiled faintly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. That I've been living for the wrong reasons, he admitted. I've spent so many years chasing after things that didn't really matter. Power, status, wealth. But it all feels hollow now. There was a long pause as Maya let his words settle in. She wasn't surprised. She had seen it in him from the beginning. The way he carried himself, always in control, always so certain. But now, she saw a man beginning to understand something deeper. It's not easy to admit that, she said quietly. But it's the first step. Thomas nodded, a sense of peace washing over him. It was as if Maya had just given him permission to feel vulnerable, to acknowledge that he didn't have all the answers. I don't know where this will take me, he said, his voice softer now, but I want to change. I don't want to keep living the way I have been. Maya's eyes softened as she looked at him. Change isn't something that happens overnight, she said, but you're already on the right path. It starts with one step, even if that step is small. Thomas felt a sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his chest. For the first time, he wasn't worried about what others thought of him or how his actions would impact his reputation. He wasn't thinking about the next deal or the next big win. He was simply thinking about being better, about being a person he could respect. I've spent so much time running from things, he continued. I've been afraid to admit I'm not happy with everything I've built. Maya nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. It's not uncommon, she said. Sometimes we think we're supposed to want something, but it's not until we stop running that we realize what we really need. Thomas looked at her, taking in her calm demeanor, her quiet strength. There was so much he wanted to ask, but the questions didn't seem as important anymore. What mattered was that he was finally on the right track, even if he didn't know exactly where it led. You've already helped me more than you know, he said, his voice low but sincere. Just by listening, just by being here. Maya smiled, her eyes lighting up with understanding. It's not me, Thomas, she said. It's you. You're the one making the choices. You're the one who's taking the steps. He felt a warmth spread through him, a deep gratitude that he hadn't expected to feel. For so long, he had relied on his own strength, his own ability to solve problems and make decisions. But in this moment, he realized that sometimes, all it took was to open up, to let someone in. Maya had shown him that. I don't know what happens next, Thomas said, his voice steady. But I know I want to be different. I want to make better choices, not just for me, but for the people I care about. Maya's smile grew a little wider. That's the right mindset, she said. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take it one step at a time. Thomas nodded, feeling something shift inside him. There was still so much to do, so much to learn, but he no longer felt burdened by it. He felt ready. He wasn't sure where the journey would take him, but he was no longer afraid to walk it. As he left the restaurant that night, the streets outside seemed quieter, the air fresher. The world felt different, not because anything had changed outwardly, but because something had shifted within him. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally heading in the right direction. The following week was a turning point for Thomas. He had started making small changes, not just in the way he ran his business, but in the way he lived his life. His days were no longer consumed by endless meetings and power struggles. He made time for reflection, time to think about the people around him, the choices he had made, and where he wanted to go next. The questions that had once seemed so intimidating now felt more like challenges he could face head-on. And through all of it, there was Maya. She had become a quiet anchor in his life, a source of calm and clarity when everything else around him seemed to be in constant motion. He hadn't seen her much outside of the restaurant, but every time they spoke, it was like a reminder of what he had been missing. One afternoon, as he sat in his office overlooking the city, he received a message from Maya. It was simple. I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about our conversation. For a moment, Thomas just stared at the message. It had been a while since they'd spoken, but he had felt a shift in their dynamic. There was something in her words that resonated with him, something about her that made him want to understand more, to know her better. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he wanted to. He responded quickly, I've been thinking about you too. How about we talk tomorrow? She replied almost immediately. Sounds good. I'll be at the restaurant in the evening. That evening, Thomas found himself walking into the restaurant once again. It wasn't like the previous visits. This time, he was coming not just to reflect, but to connect. He was unsure of what he was looking for exactly, but he knew he had to find it. As he entered, the usual warmth of the place greeted him, but there was something different in the air. He spotted Maya at the far end of the room, talking with a colleague. When she noticed him, her eyes lit up, and for a moment, everything else in the restaurant seemed to fade away. Maya walked over to him, her movements as graceful as always. She smiled as she approached, but there was something more in her expression now, something deeper, more personal. Thomas, she said softly, I'm glad you came. I wouldn't miss it, he replied with a small smile. She gestured for him to follow her to a quieter part of the restaurant, away from the bustle of the evening crowd. They sat down at a small table near the window. The soft glow of the streetlights outside created a peaceful atmosphere. Maya leaned back slightly, her eyes meeting his. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, she began, her voice calm but serious. About feeling lost. Thomas nodded, his heart pounding slightly in his chest. He hadn't expected this conversation to start with the same words, but somehow, it felt right. And, he asked, his voice steady. I think I understand it now, she said slowly. I've been in a similar place. I've spent so much time just surviving, just getting by, that I never stopped to ask myself what I really wanted. Thomas felt a pang of recognition. It was the same feeling he had been struggling with for weeks now. This sense that life had become a series of obligations, a list of things to do rather than experiences to live. So, what changed for you? he asked, leaning forward a little, genuinely curious. Maya paused for a moment, looking out the window as if she were thinking back to something distant. I realized I was waiting for something to happen, for someone to come and change everything for me, she said, her voice quieter now. But then I realized that I had to be the one to make the change. I had to take control of my own life, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. Her words hit Thomas deeply. He had spent so much of his life trying to control everything around him, his business, his success, his image. But what she was saying was different. She wasn't talking about control in the same way he had always understood it. She was talking about something deeper, something more personal. She was talking about taking ownership of his own happiness, his own future. It's not easy, though, she continued. Taking that first step is always the hardest. But once you do, everything starts to change. Thomas felt a stirring inside him, a feeling that he hadn't had in a long time. It was hope. I want that, he said quietly. I want to take that first step. I just don't know how. Maya smiled, her eyes softening. You've already started, Thomas, she said gently. By admitting that you don't have all the answers. By wanting to change. That's the first step. They sat in silence for a moment, both reflecting on the weight of their conversation. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but inside the restaurant, it felt like the world had paused. Thomas realized that this conversation, this connection, was the start of something new for him. He didn't know where it would lead, but he knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. He had to move forward. I think I've been afraid, he said after a while, his voice softer now. Afraid that if I change, I'll lose everything I've worked for. Maya reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. You won't lose anything that matters, she said softly. What's meant for you will still be there. It's just that you'll be stronger, more authentic when you get there. Thomas looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Not because everything was figured out, but because he was finally willing to step into the unknown, to embrace the change that was coming. And with Maya's words still in his mind, he knew he was ready to take the next step. Together, they sat in the quiet of the restaurant, the weight of the world outside temporarily forgotten. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a significant beginning. A beginning where change was no longer a fear, but a promise. The following days were filled with a quiet anticipation for Thomas. He had made a decision. He wasn't going to wait anymore. He wasn't going to let fear and uncertainty hold him back. The journey he had started with Maya's words and his own desire for change had taken root in him, and he was beginning to see the world in a new light. But even as he embraced this shift, he knew there was something missing. Maya had shown him the path, but he still needed to confront the parts of himself that he had avoided for so long. It wasn't just about the grand gestures or the big decisions. It was the smaller, everyday choices that shaped who he truly was. He spent time with his team, but this time, he listened more than he spoke. He attended meetings, but he didn't dominate them. For the first time in years, Thomas allowed himself to step back, to trust those around him. His empire didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like something he could share, something that could grow in new directions. But there was still something he hadn't done, something that had been weighing on him ever since his conversation with Maya. He had to face the people in his life, the ones who had been by his side for so long, and show them who he was becoming. He couldn't do this alone. He needed them. He hadn't told anyone what he was feeling, his shift in perspective, his desire for something more meaningful. But it was time to change that. One afternoon, he called his closest colleagues to a meeting. As they filed into the room, he could see the same faces, the same expressions they always wore when they came to discuss business. But today, there was something different in his demeanor. They took their seats, and Thomas took a deep breath, standing at the head of the table. I've been thinking a lot lately, he began, his voice steady but calm, about where we're going and what really matters. His team exchanged curious glances, but no one interrupted. I've spent so many years focused on success, on building this company, on being the one in control, Thomas continued. But in doing that, I've lost sight of something important, the people around me, the ones who make all of this possible. He paused, letting his words sink in. I've been running this business as if it's the only thing that defines me. But that's not true anymore. I want us to focus on something bigger, something more meaningful. The room fell silent. No one knew how to respond. They had always known Thomas as the man who controlled everything, who never let his guard down. This was new, and they didn't quite know what to make of it. But Thomas wasn't waiting for approval. He wasn't asking for validation. He was simply sharing the truth he had come to understand. "I want to build something that lasts," he said quietly. "Not just in terms of money or power, but in the way we treat each other, the way we work together. I want to create a legacy of integrity, of respect, and of kindness." His words hung in the air, heavy and real. No one spoke for a moment, but then one of his colleagues, Sarah, spoke up. "What brought this on, Thomas?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, but there was a hint of concern behind it. Thomas smiled faintly, his eyes meeting hers. "It's a long story," he said, "but I'll tell you this. I've learned that there's more to life than what we've been chasing. I've realized that the real value of what we're doing is in how we treat the people we work with, the people we serve. It's about more than just the numbers. It's about making a difference in the lives of those around us." Sarah nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "I think I understand," she said softly. "But how do we start?" Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. She wasn't rejecting him. She was meeting him where he was, ready to take the journey with him. "We start by being honest with ourselves," he said. "We start by acknowledging that we've been caught up in things that don't matter, and we shift our focus to what does. It's going to take time, but we can begin today." The conversation shifted from there, but Thomas knew that something had changed in that room. He had opened up, and in doing so, he had given them all the space to do the same. That was the first step, but it wasn't just about the team. He still needed to confront the people in his personal life, the ones who had been closest to him. They, too, needed to know about this change. He thought of Maya and the way she had gently nudged him toward this transformation. He thought about how much she had influenced his journey, and he knew that he needed to share this new part of himself with her as well. That evening, after a long day of meetings, Thomas walked to the restaurant again. It was becoming a familiar place, one that felt like home in a way he hadn't experienced in years. When he stepped inside, Maya was at the bar, serving drinks to a couple of customers. She smiled when she saw him. "Back again?" she asked, her tone light, but there was a softness in her voice. "Yes," he replied, walking over to her. "I think I'm finally ready to talk about it." Maya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Talk about what?" "About the changes I've been going through," he said, his voice steady. "About the journey I'm on." Maya nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I'm listening," she said, her voice calm and patient. And so, Thomas shared it all, his desire for change, his reflections on the past, and the way Maya had been the catalyst for it all. He told her about the meeting with his team and how he was ready to shift the focus of his business. He talked about his personal growth and how he was finally willing to let go of the things that no longer served him. Maya listened quietly, her expression never changing, but he could see the approval in her eyes. When he finished, there was a brief silence between them. Finally, Maya spoke. "I'm proud of you, Thomas," she said softly. "You're doing the right thing, and I think you're ready for whatever comes next." Thomas smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he felt more prepared than ever to face it. The weeks following his conversation with Maya were transformative for Thomas. He had made significant strides in understanding the kind of man he wanted to be, and now, with the support of his team, he was beginning to see his vision take shape. He had shared his ideas with his colleagues, and surprisingly, they were not just receptive, they were excited. The shift in his focus from just profit and growth to creating a more meaningful, ethical business was something they all found inspiring. But despite the progress, Thomas knew that there was still something important missing. While he had begun to embrace the changes in his professional life, his personal life was another matter entirely. He couldn't keep running from the past, from the people who had been a part of his journey, the people he had left behind, the relationships he had neglected, and the people who had once been the closest to him. They all needed to know who he was becoming. The fear of rejection, of not being understood, still lingered in his chest, but he knew it was time. He had to confront the people who mattered most to him. It was time to share his transformation with his family. He hadn't spoken to his father in months, not since the last argument they had over business. It had been a simple disagreement, but it had escalated into something that felt insurmountable at the time. Their relationship, once close, had deteriorated into something strained and distant. Thomas knew his father didn't understand him, and perhaps he didn't understand his father either. But he couldn't let the distance remain. It was time to rebuild that connection. One evening, after work, Thomas made the decision to visit his father. He drove to the large estate, the home he had grown up in, the place where many of his formative memories were made. The house was quiet when he arrived, the driveway empty except for the cars that his father no longer used. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest. When his father opened the door, there was a moment of silence. They both stood there, unsure of what to say. It had been too long. "Thomas," his father said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I didn't expect to see you." "I know," Thomas replied, swallowing his nerves. "But I wanted to talk. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us." His father stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. "Come in. We can talk." The house was just as Thomas remembered, large, grand, but somehow cold. The walls were lined with family portraits, the furniture elegant but impersonal. They sat down in the living room, a familiar space, yet everything felt different now. "What's on your mind?" his father asked, folding his hands in front of him. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I've been thinking a lot about what you and I used to talk about," he began, his voice steady. "About business, about success, about what it means to be a man. But I've realized that I've been so focused on all the wrong things. I've been chasing after power, after success, after more, and I didn't stop to think about what really matters." His father was quiet for a long time, his eyes watching Thomas closely. "Go on," he said after a moment. Thomas continued, the words coming more easily now. "I've started to understand that it's not just about what you accomplish. It's about who you become, who you help along the way, and how you live your life. I want to do better. I want to change." His father's expression softened slightly, but there was still a wariness in his eyes. "Change," he repeated, as if the word itself was foreign. "What do you mean? You've always been about results, Thomas. That's what made you successful." Thomas shook his head. "I know, and I'm grateful for everything I've built, but I don't want to build it at the cost of my happiness or my relationships. I want to be a better person, a better son, a better leader." There was silence between them for a moment. His father leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know if I understand what you're saying, but I've always wanted what was best for you. I may not agree with all your choices, but I can see that you're trying to find something real." Thomas felt a flicker of hope. His father wasn't rejecting him. He was listening, even if he didn't fully understand. "I know I've made mistakes," Thomas said quietly, "and I've hurt people, but I'm trying to be better." His father sighed deeply, then nodded. "I don't have all the answers either. I've spent too much of my life worrying about the wrong things, too. Maybe it's time we both try something different." The words were a small, but significant, step. They weren't perfect, and they didn't solve everything, but it was a start. A start to healing a relationship that had been fractured by misunderstandings and old expectations. As the evening wore on, they talked more. About the past, about the present, and about what they hoped for in the future. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was progress. And that was enough for Thomas. The next day, as Thomas reflected on his conversation with his father, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't just the work he was doing with his team or the changes he was making in his company. It was the personal connections, the honesty he was embracing, that were beginning to matter the most. His journey of self-discovery wasn't just about professional success. It was about living authentically, about facing his past and his fears, and about being open to the people around him. And as he thought about Maya, and how she had helped him see the truth of who he could be, he realized that this journey wasn't just about him. It was about the people he touched along the way, the people who helped him see the better version of himself. And that was the real legacy he wanted to create. Thomas had made a decision. After the heart-to-heart with his father, a sense of clarity had settled over him. It was time to fully commit to the changes he had been contemplating, not just in his business, but in his life. He had begun to understand that change wasn't just about career ambitions or achieving success. It was about becoming the person he wanted to be, someone who could look in the mirror and feel proud of the choices he had made. And as he walked through the streets of the city one afternoon, he knew what he had to do next. The past months had been a journey of self-discovery, but now, he needed to put his newfound perspective into action. His empire, the business that he had built from the ground up, had been the center of his world for so long. But it wasn't enough anymore. He had been building a legacy based on financial gain and power, but the true legacy he wanted to leave behind was something deeper, something that would last far beyond any of the numbers or accolades. It was time to bring about change on a grander scale, and for that, he needed to trust others more than he ever had before. As Thomas made his way to the office, he felt a sense of purpose guiding him. The conversation with his father had been a breakthrough, but now he was ready to make things happen in his company. When he walked into the conference room, his team was already gathered around the table, waiting for him. He could see the curiosity in their eyes, the questions about what had brought about the sudden shift in direction. This was no longer just about business. It was about making sure that his company, the one he had poured his soul into, was now built on the values that truly mattered. As he took his seat at the head of the table, he looked around at the faces of the people who had been with him throughout this journey. They were more than colleagues. They were partners in building the future he envisioned. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Thomas began, his voice calm but firm, "about what we're building here, about the kind of legacy I want us to leave behind." The room fell silent as everyone listened, their attention fixed on him. He could see that they were all waiting for him to elaborate, and he didn't want to keep them in suspense. "For years, I've been chasing after success. I've been focused on making this company bigger, better, more profitable. And while that's important, I've realized that it's not enough. I don't want to just be known for making money. I want to be known for making a difference." The team exchanged looks, some nodding, others deep in thought. "We've built something great here," Thomas continued. "But it's time to build something greater. Something that's not just about revenue or market share. I want us to focus on giving back, on making sure our work benefits the community, and on creating a company that stands for integrity, compassion, and growth. Not just for us, but for the world." There was a long pause before anyone spoke. It was Sarah, one of his longtime colleagues, who broke the silence. "I like where this is going," she said, her voice thoughtful. "But what does this actually look like? How do we put this into action?" Thomas smiled, relieved that someone had asked. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when he would start bringing his vision to life. "We start by rethinking how we measure success," he said. "It's no longer just about financial performance. It's about the impact we have on the world. We need to look at how we treat our employees, how we engage with the community, and how we use our resources to make a positive difference. We need to redefine what it means to be a successful company." The room was quiet again, but this time, it felt different. It felt like everyone was on the same page. "I know this isn't going to be easy," Thomas continued. "There will be challenges, there will be setbacks. But this is the direction I want us to go. If we're going to create a true legacy, we need to start focusing on what really matters: people, integrity, and making the world a better place." The team began to nod, and slowly, a sense of excitement started to fill the room. For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt the energy of his team shift. They were ready for this change. They were ready to build something that mattered. After the meeting, as Thomas walked back to his office, he felt a sense of accomplishment. This was just the beginning, but it felt like a new chapter in his life was unfolding. The conversation with his father had been the first step, and now, this was the moment when everything started to come together. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. Change never was. But he was ready for it. Maya's words echoed in his mind. It's never too late to make a difference. And as he sat at his desk, looking out over the city, he realized that this was exactly what he had been waiting for. The legacy he wanted to leave behind wasn't about wealth or status. It was about creating something that would endure long after he was gone. Something that would inspire others to follow the same path. As the sun set over the horizon, Thomas felt a sense of peace settle over him. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he was confident that he was on the right track. And with that, he knew that he had taken another step toward building the life and legacy he had always wanted. The progress Thomas had made in his personal and professional life had been profound. He had faced his fears, confronted the realities of the world he had built, and had begun to transform not only his company but himself. But even with all the strides he had taken, something still lingered in his mind, a nagging feeling that he had not yet addressed. Despite the positive changes, the growth, and the new sense of purpose, there was still the shadow of doubt that he needed to face. The world was changing, and so was he. but there were still challenges ahead. The balance between work and his personal life was still a delicate one, and his relationships, especially with those closest to him, needed further attention. One evening, as Thomas sat in his office, going over the plans for the next phase of his company's transformation, he received an unexpected call. It was from Sarah, one of his most trusted colleagues, and a voice he had relied on for years. "Thomas, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about something," Sarah said, her tone serious but not alarming. Thomas felt a flicker of concern. "What's going on?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "There are people who've been with this company for a long time, who are starting to question the direction you're taking," Sarah continued. "Some of them are worried that we're straying too far from what made us successful. There's talk of stepping back, of returning to the old ways." A chill ran down Thomas's spine. This was the moment he had known was coming but had hoped would never arrive. He had always known that change, while necessary, was never easy. There would always be resistance, and the fear of the unknown was a powerful force. But now, hearing that his own team was wavering, he realized the true test of his leadership was not just in his vision, but in how he could inspire and guide others through that uncertainty. "What are you suggesting?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think it's important that we address this head-on," Sarah said. "We need to remind everyone why we're making these changes. We need to show them that it's not just about shifting priorities, but about evolving to meet the needs of a changing world." Thomas thought about her words for a moment. He had always been the one making the big decisions, but this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about the future of his company, the people he had worked alongside for years, and the shared mission they all believed in. "I agree," he said finally. "Let's set up a meeting. We need to have an open, honest conversation about where we're headed and why it matters." The next day, Thomas gathered his team, the very people who had helped him build his empire. They sat in a large conference room, and the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. Sarah had been right. There was a palpable sense of doubt in the room, and it was clear that the shift in direction had unsettled many. As Thomas stood before them, he could feel the weight of their expectations, but also the weight of his own responsibility. This was more than just a meeting. It was a defining moment for his leadership. "I know that some of you have doubts about the direction we're taking," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I understand the uncertainty, and I want to address it head-on. But I also want to remind you of something. We didn't get to where we are by playing it safe. We got here by taking risks, by challenging the status quo, and by believing in something bigger than just the bottom line." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "Yes, we've changed the focus of this company, but that doesn't mean we're abandoning what made us successful. It means we're evolving to meet the needs of a changing world. It means we're committing to something that will not only sustain us in the future, but will make a real, lasting impact on the people we serve." The room was silent for a moment, and Thomas could see that the weight of his words was having an effect. The resistance was still there, but now, there was a sense of understanding beginning to form. "This isn't just about business," he continued. "It's about legacy, about the kind of company we want to be remembered for. Do we want to be remembered as a company that focused only on profit, or do we want to be remembered as a company that made a difference in the world?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time in the meeting, he saw a shift in the faces around him. People were starting to listen, starting to understand. "We've all been a part of something great," Thomas said, his voice rising with conviction. "But to make it truly great, we need to ensure that our success doesn't come at the expense of our values. We need to build something that lasts, something that stands for more than just profit margins. We need to build something that we can all be proud of." There was a long pause, but this time, it wasn't filled with doubt. It was filled with contemplation, with the beginning of a shared realization. Slowly, one by one, his colleagues nodded. They were beginning to see the vision he had been trying to communicate. The shift wasn't easy, and it would take time, but it was happening. As the meeting ended, Thomas felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't just about the business or the changes he was making. It was about his ability to inspire those around him to embrace those changes with him. He had passed the test. But more importantly, he had taken another step toward becoming the leader he wanted to be, someone who not only knew where he was going, but who could bring others along with him. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Thomas knew that it was a road worth traveling. The following weeks were a mix of optimism and tension. Thomas had taken the first steps in realigning his company with values that truly mattered to him, and he had begun to see a shift in the way people responded. The resistance was still there, but it was starting to fade. More people within the company were beginning to see the long-term vision, and they were embracing the change. However, just as things began to settle, another challenge arose. One that Thomas had not expected. One that would test not just his leadership, but his resolve to continue down the path he had chosen. It started as a whisper, a comment here, a conversation there. But soon, it became clear that there was a group of investors and influential stakeholders who were beginning to question Thomas's approach. They didn't buy into the idea that a focus on ethics and community impact could drive the same kind of growth as their previous model. They wanted their returns, and they wanted them fast. A meeting was called with the board of directors and the key investors. The room was full, and the air was thick with tension. As Thomas walked in, he could feel the eyes on him. The group, once supportive, now seemed skeptical, some faces unreadable, others openly critical. At the head of the table sat Samuel, one of the largest investors, a man whose opinion carried significant weight. Samuel had been with the company from the very beginning, and though he had supported the new direction initially, his confidence seemed to be wavering now. "Thomas," Samuel began, his voice calm but sharp, "you've been making waves, but I'm starting to question if this is the right direction for the company. You've been focusing on values and legacy, but we're here to make money. And right now, I don't see the returns that justify this shift." The room went silent. Thomas could feel the pressure building in his chest. The people around the table were the ones who had once stood by him. But now, they were questioning the very foundation of the vision he had worked so hard to build. For a moment, the old fear crept back in, the fear of losing control, of failing, of not being enough. But then, something inside him shifted. He had come too far to go back. He had made promises to himself, and to the people who were counting on him, that he would see this through. "I understand your concerns," Thomas said, his voice steady. "But I'm not just thinking about the next quarter or the next big deal. I'm thinking about the long-term sustainability of this company. We've built something incredible, yes, but now we have a responsibility to make sure it leaves a lasting legacy. And that legacy has to be built on more than just profits." Samuel raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "That's all well and good, but we live in a world where success is measured by the bottom line. How can you be sure this new direction will bring the results we need?" Thomas took a deep breath. He had anticipated this. He knew that the path he was walking would not be easy, but he also knew that if he didn't stand firm now, all the progress he had made would be for nothing. "I've already seen the impact of this shift," Thomas continued, his tone unwavering. "The team is more engaged. The customers are more loyal. We've attracted the right kind of talent, people who believe in what we're doing. The growth we're seeing now may not be immediate, but it's sustainable, and it's authentic." Another investor, Margaret, spoke up from across the table. "Sustainable growth is fine, Thomas, but what about the numbers? We're talking about a company that has always been driven by numbers, by results. You can't ignore the fact that we're falling behind competitors who are still playing by the old rules." Thomas understood the sentiment. He knew they were worried, but he had faith in his vision, and he wasn't about to back down. "I'm not asking you to ignore the numbers," he replied, locking eyes with Margaret. "I'm asking you to see the bigger picture. We're not going to build something lasting by cutting corners or focusing solely on short-term gains. If we want to build a company that people will respect, that will stand the test of time, we need to stay true to the values that define us." The room fell silent again. For a moment, it seemed like the world was holding its breath. Then, slowly, Samuel spoke again. "You're asking us to trust you, Thomas. To trust that this vision will lead to the results we need." Thomas nodded. "Yes, but I'm not just asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust the people who believe in this vision. To trust the culture we're creating here. We're building something that is bigger than just us. It's about the future. If we don't make this change, we'll be left behind. And we'll be remembered as just another company that couldn't adapt." There was a long pause, and Thomas could feel the tension in the room shift. People were thinking, processing. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her voice softer now. "I see your point, Thomas. I think we've been so focused on the numbers that we lost sight of the bigger picture. Maybe it's time to trust you and take this leap." Samuel looked around the room, his gaze resting on each person at the table. Finally, he nodded. All right, Thomas. We'll give you the chance to prove that this is the right direction. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step forward. He had faced the opposition, stood his ground, and now he had their trust. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but he knew that he had the support of those who mattered. As he left the meeting that day, he felt more confident than ever. This was the moment when everything began to come together. The true test of leadership wasn't just in making bold decisions. It was in standing firm when faced with doubt, in convincing others to believe in a vision that wasn't always easy to see. And now, with the board on his side, Thomas felt ready to take the next step, knowing that the road ahead would be challenging, but it was the road that he was meant to travel. The following weeks brought a sense of accomplishment and momentum for Thomas, but the weight of his decisions still pressed on him. The company was changing, adapting to the new vision he had set for it, and his team was more engaged than ever before. They had taken the leap with him, supporting his idea of building something bigger than just profits, a legacy based on integrity and positive impact. But with every step forward, there was an awareness that the road wasn't always smooth. There were still those who didn't believe in the changes, those who thought it was too risky, too uncertain. But for Thomas, the challenge wasn't just external, it was internal. The hardest part of all this wasn't convincing others. It was convincing himself that he was doing the right thing. The pressure to prove himself, not just to his colleagues and investors, but to the people who had always been part of his life, was real. His father's words still echoed in his mind. Their conversation had made things clearer, but the rift between them hadn't fully healed. It was one thing to change professionally, but Thomas knew that true change, the kind that would last, had to come from within. One evening, as he was winding down from a long day at the office, he decided to visit his father again. The fear of rejection had been creeping back into his mind, but he knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. It was time to take another step in healing that fractured relationship. He arrived at his father's home, the same large estate where he had grown up, the place that had always been a symbol of his success and his father's expectations. This time, there was no hesitation. As he rang the doorbell, he took a deep breath, determined to face whatever came next. When his father answered the door, there was a brief moment of silence, and then, almost as if nothing had changed, his father stepped aside to let him in. "Thomas," his father said, his voice carrying a tone of surprise, but no hostility. "I didn't expect to see you." Thomas smiled faintly. "I know, I haven't been around much, but I think it's time we talk again." His father led him into the living room, the same place where so many important conversations had been had over the years. They sat down, and for a moment, there was an unspoken tension between them. Thomas wasn't sure what he was expecting, but he knew that this was necessary. "I've been thinking about everything," Thomas began, his voice steady. "About our conversations before, about the company, about my life. And I realize I've been running from a lot of things." His father raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for Thomas to continue. "I've spent so many years trying to meet your expectations, trying to make you proud by building something big, something successful. But in doing that, I lost sight of what truly matters. I lost sight of who I am." His father's expression softened slightly, though he still appeared guarded. "I understand," he said slowly. "It's easy to get caught up in the chase. But you've always been capable, Thomas. You've always had the drive to succeed." "But success isn't enough," Thomas replied. "I've built a life around the wrong things: money, power, status. And I've forgotten about the people who matter the most. I've forgotten about the kind of man I want to be." His father was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on Thomas. For the first time, Thomas could see the weight his father had carried, the same weight that Thomas had been carrying all these years. "I've always wanted the best for you," his father said quietly. "But I've been too focused on my own ideas of success. Maybe that's why we've drifted apart." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of years of unspoken feelings. For the first time, Thomas realized that his father wasn't just a man who demanded success. He was someone who had, in his own way, been looking for a connection too. "It's not too late to rebuild," Thomas said softly, looking his father in the eyes. "It's not too late to start over, to redefine what success really means." His father nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe we've both been chasing the wrong things," he said. The silence between them was comfortable this time, filled with the understanding that they both had room to grow. I don't know if I can fully understand what you're doing, his father continued, but I'm willing to try. I'll support you, Thomas. I'll support the changes you're making. I can see now that it's not just about making money. It's about making a difference. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about mending the bond with the man who had shaped so much of his life. Thank you, Thomas said, his voice quiet but sincere. It means more to me than you know. The conversation shifted, and they began talking about the future, about their family, about the legacy they wanted to leave behind, not just in business but in life. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Thomas felt hopeful. He knew there would be more challenges, more doubts to face, but he was ready. This was the first step in healing not just his relationship with his father, but with himself. As he left that evening, he felt the weight on his shoulders lift. This was the beginning of something new, something that would take time, but something that had the potential to last. He had faced his fears, and in doing so, he had started to rebuild the relationships that truly mattered. And with that, he knew that the future, uncertain as it may be, was his to shape. The next few months unfolded with a sense of calm Thomas had never experienced before. The company was moving in the direction he had always hoped for, and his team was fully invested in the new mission. Yet, despite all the external progress, Thomas knew that the internal journey was far from over. He had made amends with his father, but the relationships that truly needed mending didn't end there. He still had to face the doubts and fears that had been simmering beneath the surface. He had learned how to lead with empathy and integrity in the workplace, but could he truly apply the same principles to his personal life? The question lingered as he prepared for the next big challenge. His mother's sudden illness had brought him back to his childhood home, a place that he had not visited in years. The house was quieter now, empty in many ways. The life his family had once lived seemed like a distant memory. Yet, it was still a place filled with unspoken emotions, memories of times both good and bad. Standing at the door, Thomas felt a rush of conflicting emotions. There was the guilt of not being there more often, the frustration of the unresolved tension with his family, and the desire to make things right. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of the house, the same as it had always been, hit him. His mother was sitting in the living room, surrounded by a few close relatives, looking frail but still strong in her own way. She smiled weakly when she saw him. "Thomas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know, Mom," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have come sooner." She motioned for him to sit next to her, her tired eyes taking in the changes in him. "You've been busy, I'm sure," she said softly, "but I'm glad you're here." The small talk didn't last long. It was clear that there was more to discuss, more to resolve. The space between them, the years of silence, hung heavy in the air. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Thomas began. "About everything we've been through as a family, and what I've been missing." His mother looked at him closely, as if weighing his words. "What do you mean, Thomas?" she asked. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I've been focusing so much on building my life, my career, that I lost sight of the people who really matter. And you, my family, you're the ones who helped me get here. But I've been so wrapped up in my own world that I didn't realize I was neglecting the relationships that are the foundation of everything." His mother didn't speak at first. She simply looked at him, her gaze soft but piercing. "You're a good man, Thomas," she said after a pause. "But you've always been a bit like your father. Always thinking that if you can just do enough, if you can just fix everything, everything will be okay. But life isn't like that. You can't fix it all. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is be there for the people who need you." Her words hit him hard. They were simple, but they cut deep. Thomas had spent so much of his life trying to control everything, to fix everything, to prove that he could succeed, that he forgot what really mattered, being present for the people who loved him. "I know I've made mistakes," he admitted, his voice raw. "And I've hurt you, Mom. I've been too focused on my own success to realize that the true success is in the people who are by my side. I don't want to make that mistake anymore." His mother reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and comforting. "You're here now," she said softly. "That's what matters. Life's too short to dwell on the past. We can't change it, but we can work toward a better future." Her words, so simple yet profound, broke through the wall Thomas had built around his heart. In that moment, he realized that no amount of success or achievement could replace the need for love and connection. His work could only go so far, but his family, his relationships, were the true foundation of everything. "I've been afraid," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Afraid that if I let go of the control, if I stop trying to fix everything, everything will fall apart." His mother smiled faintly, the wisdom of years reflected in her eyes. "You don't have to fix everything, Thomas. Sometimes, letting go is the hardest thing to do, but it's the most freeing. You're allowed to be vulnerable, to rely on others. And you're allowed to make mistakes." Her words settled in his chest like a heavy weight that suddenly felt lighter. He had been carrying this burden for so long, thinking that he had to have all the answers, thinking that he had to be perfect. But now, in this moment, he realized that being human meant accepting his flaws and trusting the people around him. "I'm ready to change, Mom," he said softly. "I want to be the son you've always deserved." His mother squeezed his hand gently, a quiet understanding passing between them. "You've always been my son, no matter what," she said. "And I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the man you've become." For the first time in a long time, Thomas felt the weight of his past, his fears, and his mistakes start to melt away. He had made peace with the fact that he couldn't control everything, that he couldn't fix everything, but he could be present. He could love and be loved in return. As he sat with his mother, the hours slipping away, he knew that this was the beginning of something new, not just for his company, but for his life. And with that, Thomas understood that he wasn't just rebuilding his business or his relationships. He was rebuilding himself. The following months were filled with a sense of calm for Thomas. The changes he had made in both his personal and professional life were beginning to take root. His company was more aligned with his values than ever before, and the impact of these changes was becoming clear. His team was more engaged, and they had begun to see the results of focusing not just on profits but on making a real difference in the world. Customers were responding positively to the company's new mission, and slowly, but surely, Thomas was starting to feel like he was on the right path. Yet, despite all the progress, a new challenge emerged that threatened to disrupt the balance he had worked so hard to establish. It came in the form of an unexpected visit. An old business partner, Jonathan, who had always been an influential figure in Thomas's life. Jonathan had been part of the early days of the company, and although they had parted ways on less than ideal terms, Thomas had always considered him a friend. When Jonathan showed up at his office unannounced, it was clear he had something important to discuss. Jonathan was in his mid-50s now, his once youthful energy replaced with a more hardened, businesslike demeanor. "Thomas," he said, his tone clipped but cordial, "I've been hearing a lot about the changes you've made at the company. I have to admit, I'm intrigued, but I'm also concerned." Thomas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What are you concerned about?" he asked, trying to remain calm. Jonathan leaned forward, his hands steepled in front of him. "I've always respected your drive, Thomas, but I think you're making a mistake. You're changing the company's direction too quickly. You're focusing too much on values and not enough on results. If you don't get back to what works, you'll lose everything you've built." Thomas swallowed, but he stood firm. "I've already made my decision, Jonathan," he said, his voice steady. "This is the direction I want to take. I believe in what we're doing." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You're not seeing the bigger picture. People don't care about values, Thomas. They care about profits. They care about numbers. You've built something great, but if you keep going down this path, you're going to lose it all." Thomas felt the weight of Jonathan's words, but he refused to back down. The old Thomas might have been swayed by the fear of failure, the pressure to maintain the status quo, but this new version of him, this man who had embraced vulnerability, honesty, and a new purpose, wasn't going to let fear control him. "I understand what you're saying, Jonathan," Thomas said, his voice calm but unwavering. "But I'm not focused on just making money. I'm focused on making a difference. And that's something that I believe in more than anything." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, studying Thomas for a moment. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low, almost disappointed. "But if you're determined to go down this path, I won't stop you. Just know that you're on your own." Thomas nodded, understanding that this was the breaking point. The partnership with Jonathan, once a key part of his life and business, was now coming to an end. He had already made his choice, and it was a choice that would define not just his future, but the future of his company. As Jonathan left the office, Thomas stood by the window, looking out over the city. The weight of the conversation hung in the air, but as he stood there, he realized something important. This was not the end of his journey. It was just another test. A test of his resolve. A test of his commitment to the changes he had made. And for the first time, he felt confident in his decision. He knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but he was no longer afraid. He had taken the first step, and now it was up to him to walk it. The next day, Thomas called a meeting with his team. He could feel the pressure mounting as he stood before them, but he knew that he had to be transparent. They had been following him on this journey, and now they needed to know where they were headed. "I just had a meeting with Jonathan," Thomas began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "And while we've always had a strong partnership, it's become clear that we're headed in different directions. Jonathan doesn't agree with the changes we've made, and that's okay. But I want you all to know that this vision, this commitment to making a difference, is the path I'm choosing. And I'm asking you to continue walking with me." The room was quiet for a moment, and Thomas could see the uncertainty in some of their eyes. But then, one by one, they began to nod, their expressions softening with understanding. They were with him. They believed in the vision too. "We're all in this together," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We've already seen the impact of what we're doing. This is the right direction, Thomas." Thomas smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over him. This was the moment when everything truly changed. The team wasn't just following him, they were leading the charge with him. They had bought into the vision, and they were ready to see it through. The conversation with Jonathan had been difficult, but it had reaffirmed everything Thomas had come to understand. Success wasn't about maintaining the old ways. It was about evolving, about being willing to take risks and stay true to what truly mattered. As he left the meeting, Thomas felt more confident than ever before. The doubts that had once clouded his mind had lifted. He had made the right decision, and now, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With his team by his side, there was no limit to what they could achieve. The road would not always be easy, but Thomas was ready to walk it, knowing that he was finally on the path to something that truly mattered. The months that followed solidified Thomas's belief that he was on the right path. The vision he had set in motion was becoming more than just a business strategy. It was becoming a way of life. His team was thriving, not just because of the profits they were making, but because they were aligned with something meaningful. The company was no longer just about numbers. It was about people, about creating an impact that would last far beyond the products they sold. But despite the progress, there were still obstacles that came with this new direction. One of the biggest challenges Thomas faced was reconciling his vision with the expectations of those outside his immediate circle. Investors, competitors, and even some of his close friends began to question whether this new model could sustain itself. There were whispers about the company's growth slowing down, about whether they had strayed too far from what had made them successful in the first place. One afternoon, Thomas sat alone in his office, staring out at the skyline. The weight of it all felt heavier today. The challenges were mounting, and he could feel the pressure building. He had put so much of himself into this, into creating a company that wasn't just about making money, but making a difference. But now, it felt like the world was telling him that it wasn't enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a knock at the door. Thomas looked up, surprised to see Maya standing there. She had become more than just a colleague or friend. She was someone who had helped him through the toughest moments, someone who understood him in ways others didn't. "Hey," she said, a warm smile on her face. "I thought I'd find you here." Thomas smiled faintly. "I've been thinking a lot. Too much, probably." Maya walked over and sat down across from him. "You've been carrying a lot on your shoulders lately," she said. "But I can see it's getting to you. You don't have to do this alone." Thomas sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I know. I've surrounded myself with people I trust, people who are committed to the same vision. But the truth is, I'm scared. I'm scared that all of this, the change, the values, the shift in focus, it won't work. I'm scared that I'll fail and let everyone down." Maya's eyes softened as she listened. "I get it," she said gently. "But you're not going to let anyone down. The people who are with you now are with you for the long haul. They believe in what you're building. And so do I." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. The fear was real, but so was the support around him. "I'm afraid that we're moving too fast, That we're taking too many risks, he admitted. What if it doesn't pay off? Maya smiled, a reassuring expression that filled the room with warmth. What if it does? She asked. What if the risk is exactly what you need to create something that will last? You've already built a solid foundation. You've earned the trust of your team, your clients, and your investors. Now it's time to let them see the full picture. Her words hit home. For so long, Thomas had been focused on avoiding failure, on maintaining control, and on ensuring the business was always moving forward. But what if the real challenge wasn't avoiding failure? It was embracing the risk, the possibility of change. What if the real victory wasn't just about growing his company, but about changing the way business was done, about leading by example? I've been afraid of what might happen if I take a step forward, Thomas said, his voice quieter now. But I'm beginning to see that the real risk is not taking that step at all. I've built this company with a clear purpose in mind. I can't back down now. Maya's smile grew. Exactly. It's not about playing it safe. It's about pushing through the fear, staying true to what you believe in, and trusting that the path you're on will lead you to something greater. Thomas nodded, feeling a surge of clarity. The weight he had been carrying felt lighter now. It wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about believing in the journey, even when the road ahead was uncertain. Thank you, Maya, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. I needed to hear that. She stood up, giving him a quick nod. Anytime, Thomas. You're not alone in this. As she left his office, Thomas took a deep breath. He felt a sense of calm wash over him. The path ahead was still filled with uncertainties, but now, he felt ready to face them. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only way forward. The next day, Thomas stood before his team again, just as he had many times before. But this time, there was something different about him. He was no longer carrying the weight of doubt and fear. He was carrying something stronger, purpose. We've faced challenges before, Thomas began, his voice steady and confident. And we will face many more. But I believe in what we're doing. I believe in all of you. Together, we're not just building a company, we're building a movement. And we're going to keep pushing forward, no matter what. His team looked at him, eyes filled with trust and belief. They were ready for whatever came next. As the meeting concluded, Thomas felt a renewed sense of hope. The future was still uncertain, but now, he was no longer afraid to take risks. He was ready to embrace the unknown, to continue on this journey, knowing that with the support of those around him, he could face anything. And as he walked out of the meeting, he knew that the path ahead was no longer just a dream. It was his reality, and he was ready to make it happen. The months that followed brought with them the realization that Thomas's journey of transformation was far from over. The company had seen impressive growth, not just financially, but in terms of culture and values. The employees were more engaged, and the customers were loyal in ways Thomas had never anticipated. However, success had a way of bringing about new challenges, and as the company continued to expand, so did the pressure. There were competitors who viewed Thomas's new approach as a weakness, some even mocking his focus on values instead of raw profits. Investors, once enthusiastic, were now questioning whether the shift in direction was sustainable. But Thomas remained steadfast. He had come too far to let doubt undermine the mission he had set for himself. Yet, with all the external pressure mounting, there was a growing unease within himself. Could he continue to push forward when the world around him seemed to be pulling in the opposite direction? It was during one of those long nights at the office, working late to prepare for another round of meetings, that Thomas realized something he hadn't fully grasped until then. The fear of failure, the nagging worry that he might not succeed, was still lurking beneath the surface. He had spent so many years building an empire on his own, pushing others aside in his pursuit of success. But now, in this new chapter of his life, he had come to understand that he couldn't do it alone. His journey wasn't just about leading a company. It was about building relationships, trusting others, and relying on the support of those around him. He hadn't allowed himself to lean on people the way he needed to, and now, he realized that if he wanted to truly succeed, if he wanted his vision to work, he would have to open himself up in ways he never had before. The next day, as he prepared for a critical meeting with the board of directors, Thomas called a personal meeting with his closest colleagues and friends within the company. He wanted to be transparent with them, to share his feelings and fears about the challenges ahead. When they gathered in the conference room, The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. "I need to tell you all something," Thomas began, his voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "I've been carrying a lot of weight on my shoulders. I've been so focused on pushing the company forward that I've forgotten what really matters. Our relationships, the trust we've built, and the people who are by our side through this journey." His team looked at him, some surprised, others simply watching with understanding. He had always been the strong, unwavering leader, but this side of him, the side that admitted weakness, was new. "I've realized that if we're going to succeed, it's not just about being right or about being the strongest. It's about leaning on each other, being vulnerable enough to ask for help, and trusting that we're all in this together." There was a moment of silence as his words settled in the room. Then Sarah, one of his closest confidants, spoke up. "Thomas, I've never seen you like this. But I think what you're saying is exactly what we all need to hear. We've followed your lead because we believe in you, but it's also important to remember that we're a team. We're all here to support you, just as much as you've supported us." Her words were a balm for Thomas's soul. He had feared that his vulnerability would be seen as a weakness, but here, among the people he trusted, he realized that it wasn't weakness at all. It was strength. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent so much time trying to protect this company, trying to be the one who has all the answers, that I've forgotten that I don't have to do it alone. And I'm sorry if I've made you all feel like I wasn't there for you when you needed me. We've all been in this together," Sarah said. "And we're going to continue to be. We're all here to help make this work. Thomas, you're not carrying this burden by yourself anymore." The relief that washed over Thomas in that moment was profound. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone in this. The weight of the responsibility hadn't gone away, but he realized he didn't have to shoulder it alone. It was in sharing that weight, in trusting his team and allowing them to support him, that the path forward became clearer. Over the next few weeks, Thomas made a conscious effort to be more open with his team, to share his fears and his doubts as much as his triumphs. He found that by being vulnerable, by admitting the things he didn't know, he not only grew as a leader, but the bond within the team strengthened. They began to trust him more, not because he had all the answers, but because they saw his authenticity, his willingness to embrace the unknown alongside them. As the company entered a new phase, with larger projects on the horizon and more opportunities to grow, Thomas knew the journey was far from over. But now, more than ever, he was confident that he wasn't walking it alone. The road ahead was still filled with uncertainty, but Thomas had learned the most important lesson of all, that success wasn't just about numbers or growth. It was about the people who walked beside you along the way. And with that knowledge, he felt ready for whatever came next. As the company flourished and Thomas's personal journey continued to evolve, the sense of accomplishment was palpable. But more importantly, he had begun to embrace something more profound than success alone. He had embraced fulfillment. The changes he had worked so hard to create, the shift in priorities, the new values that were now driving his life, had taken root, and the results were far more satisfying than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about a transformation that went beyond profits and growth. It was about making a difference, both in the world and in the lives of the people he cared about. Thomas knew the road had not been easy. It had been fraught with doubts, fears, and challenges. Yet, with each step he had taken, he had learned something new. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about control, it was about connection. It wasn't about knowing all the answers. It was about asking the right questions and being open to the journey, even when the path was unclear. The support of his team had been invaluable. Their unwavering belief in his vision had been the anchor he needed to keep moving forward. He had learned to lean on them, to trust them, and in doing so, they had become not just colleagues, but a family. But perhaps the most significant shift was in his relationship with himself. For the first time in his life, Thomas was at peace with who he was becoming. The pressure to be perfect had faded, replaced by a deeper sense of purpose. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone. He had found his worth in the journey itself, not in the accolades or the recognition. The changes he had made in the company had set in motion a new kind of success, one rooted in authenticity, integrity, and a commitment to the greater good. But Thomas knew that this was just the beginning. There were still many challenges ahead. The world was always evolving, and so was he. But now, As he looked toward the future, he didn't see a road filled with obstacles. He saw a road filled with possibilities. It wasn't about the destination. It was about the path he was walking and the people he was walking it with. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Thomas found himself back in the place that had come to represent both reflection and clarity, the restaurant where he had met Maya all those months ago. The place had become a symbol of the transformation he had undergone, a place where he had first realized that change was not only possible, but necessary. As he walked in, he saw her right away, standing behind the bar, as calm and collected as ever. She saw him too, and a soft smile spread across her face. Without thinking, Thomas made his way over to her. "You always seem to be here when I need to find some peace," he said, his voice light, but sincere. Maya's smile widened. "Maybe you've just learned to find it within yourself," she replied, her voice warm and knowing. For a moment, neither of them said anything more. They simply stood there, the quiet hum of the restaurant around them, a comfortable silence that said more than words ever could. Finally, Thomas spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his tone reflective, "about how far I've come and how much more I still have to learn." Maya raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what have you learned?" she asked. Thomas smiled softly, a hint of gratitude in his eyes. "I've learned that the journey never really ends. We're always evolving, always growing. But I've also learned that it's okay not to have all the answers. The important thing is to keep moving forward, to keep asking the right questions, and to surround yourself with the people who believe in you." Maya nodded slowly, as if she had always known this truth. "Sounds like you found some peace," she said quietly. "That's what it's all about, isn't it?" "It is," Thomas replied, his voice filled with conviction. "And I found that the peace I was searching for was within me all along. I just had to be willing to let go of my fears and trust the process." Maya smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Thomas," she said softly. "It's not easy to make the kind of changes you've made, but you've done it." Thomas felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He wasn't used to hearing praise, but with Maya, it felt different. It felt earned. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I wouldn't have gotten here without the support of people like you." Maya's smile softened. "You got here because you were willing to change," she replied. "You're the one who did the hard work." As they spoke, Thomas realized that he had come full circle. He had started this journey unsure of himself, afraid of failure, and hesitant to take risks. But now, he stood before the person who had shown him the way, the person who had believed in him when he hadn't believed in himself. He had learned that success wasn't just about what he could achieve. It was about the people he could help along the way, the relationships he could build, and the legacy he could create. And as he looked ahead, he knew that his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. With the support of those around him, he felt ready for whatever the future held. The path ahead was still uncertain, but now, he faced it with confidence and with hope. He had learned that the most important thing wasn't the destination, it was the journey itself. And that, he realized, was something worth striving for. In this captivating journey of transformation, Thomas embarks on a life-changing path where he learns that true success goes beyond the conventional pursuit of wealth and power. In this story, based on powerful Black stories of resilience, leadership, and personal growth, Thomas faces his deepest fears and learns to embrace vulnerability. Throughout his journey, he discovers that making meaningful connections and prioritizing integrity can lead to a deeper sense of fulfillment. As he navigates the challenges of business and personal relationships, Thomas finds inspiration from the struggles of others, specifically the Black stories that reflect courage, empathy, and the drive to make a lasting impact. By confronting his own doubts and learning to trust the people around him, Thomas builds not just a successful company, but a lasting legacy rooted in purpose and compassion. The journey is filled with tough decisions, powerful conversations, and an unwavering commitment to a higher calling. With the support of his team and the wisdom he gains from the experiences of others, particularly those drawn from impactful Black stories, Thomas is empowered to reshape his future and build a legacy that will inspire others for generations. These Black stories serve as a testament to the power of change and the strength found in facing personal challenges head-on. Thomas's transformation becomes a story of hope and perseverance, showing that with the right values and a commitment to growth, anything is possible. This compelling narrative of self-discovery reminds us that true success is found not just in achievements, but in the connections we make and the lives we touch.